Well, let me tell you about the day everything changed at Vortex Prime Academy. And I do mean everything. You see, I am Krelthak, a simple maintenance drone operator who happened to witness the most ridiculous, terrifying, and absolutely impossible thing in the known galaxy. But I am getting ahead of myself, aren't I? The Academy floats in the Centauri Nebula, a prestigious institution where the galaxy's elite send their spawn to learn advanced combat techniques, stellar warfare, and how to properly intimidate lesser species. It is the Harvard of horror, the Yale of violence, if you will. Students from over 300 predator species attend classes here, each one more deadly than the last. And then there are the professors. Well, they make the students look like cuddly pets. On this particular rotation cycle, I was cleaning the observation deck of Lecture Hall Omega 7 when the new human student walked in. Now, humans are... How do I put this diplomatically? They are considered somewhat of a joke in our corner of the galaxy. Soft, pink, fragile things that die if you look at them wrong. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They cannot even see properly in low light conditions. The Academy only accepted this one, Ranger Collins, as part of some diplomatic initiative. Charity case, really. Professor Vex Narath, a 12-foot-tall saurian with acid for saliva and claws that can slice through titanium, was conducting advanced intimidation theory. The class was packed with the usual suspects. Kraxan battlespawn with their razor-sharp mandibles, Thorian death cubs sporting their signature poison quills, and the crown jewel of the group, young Lord Zephyr-Nine-Claws, heir to the Apex Predator dynasty. Now, Zephyr-Nine-Claws, this kid was something else. Even by our standards, he was terrifying. His species, the Ravagers, are born killers. They emerge from their mothers, ready to hunt. By age 3, they can disembowel a galactic standard bearer. By age 10, they are considered weapons of mass destruction. And Zephyr? He was 15. The kid had already claimed 17 kills in ritual combat, held the junior record for longest intimidating stare, and once made a Thornback warrior cry just by existing in his general vicinity. So there I was, trying to be invisible while polishing the observation windows, when Ranger Collins enters the classroom. The kid could not have been more than 18 years old, maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, wearing some ridiculous blue uniform that looked like it came from a children's costume shop. The entire class went silent, not out of respect, mind you, but out of sheer confusion. It was like watching a butterfly walk into a den of starving void serpents. Professor Vex Narath's multiple eyes focused on the human, with what I can only describe as barely concealed amusement. "Ah! Our diplomatic guest has arrived," he hissed, acid dripping from his fangs and leaving small craters in the floor. "Class, observe the human. Note its pathetic stature, its complete lack of natural weapons, its obvious terror. But here is the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. Ranger Collins did not look terrified. He did not look intimidated. Hell, he barely looked impressed. The kid just walked calmly to an empty seat in the third row, nodded politely to Professor Vex Narath, and said, 'Good morning, sir. Sorry I am late.' The audacity. The sheer, unbelievable audacity. You could have heard a photon drop. Professor Vex Narath's scales shifted to a dangerous crimson color, and his tail began that slow, hypnotic swaying motion that usually preceded someone getting their spine ripped out. 'Human,' he growled, each word dripping with venom. 'In this institution, weakness is not tolerated. Fear is expected. Respect is demanded. Do you understand your position here?' Ranger Collins tilted his head slightly, like he was actually considering the question. 'I understand that I am here to learn, sir. Same as everyone else. Same as everyone else. Can you believe this? The nerve of this soft-skinned creature.' The other students were beginning to twitch with anticipation. Some were already extending their claws, their predatory instincts triggered by the scent of prey that showed no proper fear response. But it was young Lord Zephyr-Nine-Claws who decided to take action first. The Ravager cub rose from his seat with fluid, deadly grace, his 9 claws extending to their full length, each one capable of slicing through battle armor. His pupils dilated to hunting mode, and that characteristic low rumble began emanating from his throat. Every other student immediately backed away, recognizing the pre-hunt posture of an apex predator. 'Human!' Zephyr snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that were designed by evolution to freeze prey animals in terror. You do not belong here. This place is for hunters, not food. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even Professor Vex Narath took a step back, his professional curiosity warring with his survival instincts. When a Ravager enters hunting mode, smart creatures get out of the way. Period. It is basic galactic survival knowledge. Ranger Collins turned in his seat to face the predator cub, and I swear on my mother's clutch, he looked bored. Not scared. Not intimidated. Not preparing to run for his pathetic life. Bored. Like Zephyr was an annoyance rather than a harbinger of imminent death. That's an interesting perspective, the human said conversationally. But I think you might be confused about something. Confused? Confused? Lord Zephyr-Nine-Claws, heir to a dynasty of killers, apex predator extraordinaire, nightmare fuel in adolescent form. Confused? The sheer impossibility of it was stunning. It was like watching someone tell a black hole that it was not particularly impressive. Zephyr's snarl deepened, and those claws extended another inch. The Ravager took a threatening step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human's desk. The only thing I am confused about, meat, is why you are still breathing. And that, my friends, is when Ranger Collins stood up. Now, I want you to understand something about humans. They are small. They are fragile. They have no natural weapons worth mentioning. But when that kid stood up to face down a 15-year-old Ravager in full hunting mode, something in the room shifted. I cannot explain it, cannot quantify it, cannot make sense of it even now. But every predator in that classroom suddenly felt uncomfortable. Apologize, the human said quietly. 2 words. Just 2 simple words, spoken in a tone so calm and level that it took everyone a moment to process what had been said. The silence that followed was not the expectant quiet of predators waiting for entertainment. It was the stunned silence of creatures suddenly realizing that they might have fundamentally misunderstood something very important. Zephyr-Nine-Claws blinked his 6 eyes in rapid succession, his claws wavering slightly. What did you say? I said apologize, Ranger Collins repeated, his voice still conversational, but carrying something underneath that I had never heard before. Something that made my scales itch and my survival instincts start screaming contradictory warnings. You were rude to Professor Vex Narath by interrupting his class. You were rude to your classmates by creating a disruption, and you were rude to me by making assumptions about my capabilities. So apologize. The young Ravager's confusion was palpable. His species had been apex predators for over 10,000 years. They did not apologize. They did not back down. They definitely did not take orders from prey animals. But something in the human's steady gaze was causing Zephyr's predatory confidence to waver. I do not apologize to food, he managed. But the snarl was gone from his voice, replaced by something that almost sounded like uncertainty. Ranger Collins nodded thoughtfully. Well, that is unfortunate, because now I'm going to have to teach you some manners. And then, without any warning, without any visible preparation, the human moved. I have seen predators in action before. I have witnessed cracks and battle spawn leap across impossible distances, watched Thornian death cubs strike with lightning speed, observed Saurian professors move like liquid death. But what Ranger Collins did, it was not like anything in the natural world. It was not the desperate flailing of prey trying to escape. It was not the crude bludgeoning of a species that relied on tools instead of evolution. It was precise. It was efficient. And it was absolutely terrifying. The human took 1 step forward, ducked under Zephyr's instinctive claw swipe, grabbed the young Ravager by the wrist, and used the creature's own momentum to send him tumbling across 3 rows of desks. The entire maneuver took maybe 2 seconds, and when it was over, Lord Zephyr-Nine-Claws, heir to the apex predator dynasty, was sitting on the floor looking stunned. The classroom erupted in chaos. Half the students immediately shifted into defensive postures, their predatory instincts finally recognizing a genuine threat. The other half seemed frozen in shock, their worldview crumbling around them like a poorly constructed nest. But Professor Vex Narath? He just stood there, all 12 feet of acid-breathing, titanium-clawed death machine, staring at the human with something approaching respect. "Most impressive," he hissed, and for the first time since I had known him, the professor's voice carried no mockery, no condescension, no barely veiled contempt. Just pure professional appreciation. "Ranger Collins, was it? Perhaps you would care to demonstrate the technique you just used for the class?" Ranger Collins helped Zephyr-Nine-Claws to his feet with surprising gentleness, which somehow made the entire display even more unsettling. "Actually, sir, I think Lord Zephyr has something he would like to say first." All eyes turned to the young Ravager, who was still processing what had just happened to him. His claws had retracted completely, his pupils had returned to normal, and for the first time in his life, he looked like what he actually was. A confused teenager who had just been schooled by someone he had assumed was beneath his notice. He began, then stopped, his throat working as he struggled with words his species was not designed to speak. "I apologize, Professor Vex Narath, for the disruption." The professor nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And to your classmates?" Zephyr looked around the room at his fellow students, many of whom were still frozen in defensive positions. "I apologize for creating a disturbance." "And to Ranger Collins?" This was the hard part. This was where the fundamental order of the galaxy was supposed to reassert itself. Apex predators did not apologize to prey. It went against every natural law, every evolutionary imperative, every cultural norm that had existed for millennia. But as Zephyr-Nine-Claws looked at the human standing calmly beside him, something in his expression changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like curiosity. "I apologize, Ranger Collins," he said quietly. "I underestimated you." The human smiled then, and it was not the nervous grin of someone who had just gotten lucky. It was the confident smile of someone who had been exactly where he wanted to be from the very beginning. "Apology accepted, Zephyr. Mind if I call you Zephyr?" And that is when I knew, beyond any shadow of doubt, that everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong. Dead wrong. Because Lord Zephyr-Nine-Claws, heir to the most feared predator dynasty in known space, just nodded and said, "Yes, that would be acceptable." Professor Vex Narath cleared his throat, a sound like grinding metal that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "Well then, class, it seems we have learned our first lesson of the day. Appearances can be deceiving, assumptions can be fatal, and respect must be earned, not demanded." He turned to face Ranger Collins directly. "Would you care to share with the class exactly what species of predator you represent, Ranger Collins? Because I find myself curious." The human's smile widened slightly. "Well, Professor, technically speaking, humans are persistence predators. We are not the fastest or the strongest or the most heavily armed, but we have one particular talent that makes us rather effective hunters." "And what might that be?" Professor Vex Narath inquired, his multiple eyes glittering with professional interest. "We never give up," Ranger Collins said simply. "Ever. Once we decide something needs to happen, we just keep going until it does. No matter how long it takes, no matter what gets in our way, no matter how impossible it seems, we adapt, we learn, we persevere, and eventually, we win." The silence that followed this statement was different from all the others. It was not shocked, or confused, or uncertain. It was thoughtful, calculating, the kind of quiet that predators make when they are suddenly reevaluating their understanding of the food chain. And as I floated there in my maintenance pod, pretending to clean windows while actually witnessing what might have been the most important moment in galactic history, I could not help but wonder, if this was what happened when just one human showed up to school, what would happen when the rest of their species decided to pay attention to the wider galaxy? Somehow, I suspected we were about to find out. Before anyone could fully process what Collins had just revealed about his species, the classroom door burst open with enough force to crack the reinforced titanium frame. Dean Krugvorth stormed in, all 8 arms flailing with barely contained fury, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking ominously with each thunderous step. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" he roared, his voice capable of shattering glass at close range. Behind him scuttled his assistant, a nervous flitter named Pip Toll, desperately trying to keep up while juggling approximately 17 different datapads. The dean stopped mid-rant when he noticed the unusual seating arrangement, specifically the fact that every predator in the room except the human was pressed against the walls like they were trying to melt into them. His compound eyes swiveled to take in the scene, and I watched his mandibles twitch with confusion. "Professor Vex-Narath," he clicked in a slightly more controlled tone. "Why does your classroom look like a bomb went off? And why is everyone acting like they have seen a ghost?" The Saurian professor straightened to his full imposing height, but there was something different about his posture now. Less arrogant, more respectful. "Dean Krugvorth, we have just witnessed a most enlightening demonstration of interspecies combat dynamics." "Combat?" The dean's attention snapped to Ranger Collins, who had returned to his seat and was casually reviewing his notes like nothing had happened. "The human was involved in combat? Is it injured? Do we need medical assistance? The diplomatic ramifications alone could—" "The human won," Zephyr interrupted quietly, still sitting exactly where Collins had left him. Every head in the room turned to stare at the young Ravager. Dean Krugvorth's compound eyes widened to their maximum diameter, which on a Krulovian was roughly equivalent to witnessing your own death certificate being signed. "Won? Won what, exactly?" "The fight," Zephyr continued, his voice carrying a strange note of wonder. "I challenged him, and he won. Decisively. Now, I have been around predators my entire life. I know the difference between boasting and genuine respect." What I heard in Zephyr-Nine-Claws' voice was not humiliation or anger or the sulking of a spoiled youngling who had been denied his prey. It was the acknowledgement of a superior predator by one who recognized skill when he saw it. Dean Krugvorth made a sound that roughly translated to, "What in the 7 hells of Kraxos?" But before he could formulate a proper response, the classroom's emergency alert system activated. Red lights began flashing, and a synthesized voice echoed through the speakers. "Academy alert. Priority 1. All students and faculty report to designated emergency positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Professor Vex-Narath's scales immediately shifted to battle-ready black, and his claws extended automatically. "Dean, what is the nature of the emergency?" Krugvorth was frantically consulting with his assistant, who was scrolling through datapads with increasingly panicked gestures. "Unknown hostile contacts have entered the Centauri system," Piptol squeaked. "Multiple ships, heavily armed, broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies." "Pirates," Vex-Narath growled. "Negative," Piptol replied, his tiny claws clicking nervously on the datapad. "Configuration unknown. Technology signatures do not match any known species in our databases." That is when Ranger Collins looked up from his notes with an expression I can only describe as mildly annoyed. "What do the ships look like?" The question caught everyone off guard. Piptol consulted his datapad again. Angular, predominantly gray and black, with red markings. Approximately 2 kilometers in length, bristling with weapon systems we cannot identify." The human sighed and rubbed his forehead, like he had developed a headache. "How many ships?" 17 vessels detected so far, with more arriving every few minutes. "Are they demanding anything specific, or just general surrender?" Piptol's ears twitched as he accessed the communication logs. "They are demanding the immediate surrender of what they call the human infiltration agent and threatening to destroy the Academy if he is not handed over within 1 standard hour." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to stare at Collins, who was now looking genuinely irritated rather than concerned. "Well," he said conversationally, "that is unfortunate." Dean Krugvorth's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like a machine gun. "Ranger Collins, do you know who these beings are?" "Oh yes," the human replied, standing up and straightening his ridiculous uniform. "They are Void Stalkers. And they are here because of me." If you thought the silence was bad before, you were wrong. This was the kind of quiet that happens when everyone simultaneously realizes they are standing in the middle of a fusion reactor that is about to achieve critical mass. "Void Stalkers," Professor Vex-Narath whispered, and for the first time since I had known him, there was actual fear in his voice. "Now, let me explain something about Void Stalkers. They are the bogeymen of the galaxy, the monsters that other monsters check for under their beds. They exist in the spaces between star systems, hunting entire civilizations for sport. They do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They simply appear, destroy everything that moves, and vanish back into the void, like they were never there. And apparently, they wanted our human." "Ranger Collins," Dean Krugvorth said very carefully, "perhaps you could explain why these particular entities are interested in you." The human was now moving around the classroom, and I noticed he was checking the windows, evaluating the exits, examining the structural supports. Not frantically, not with panic, but with the methodical precision of someone planning something very specific. "Well," he said absently, while testing the strength of a wall panel, "it probably has something to do with the fact that I destroyed their harvesting operation in the Kepler system about 6 months ago." "You destroyed their harvesting operation?" Zephyr-Nine-Claws was staring at Collins with something approaching awe. "Oh yes. Nasty business, really. They were systematically exterminating the colonies there. Took out about 300,000 civilians before I managed to track down their base of operations." Collins paused in his examination of the room to glance at the young Ravager. "Turns out, Void Stalkers do not like it when you blow up their motherships." "Motherships?" Professor Vex-Narath's voice had gone up an octave. "Plural?" 7 of them, actually. Though, to be fair, I had help with the last 3. The human returned to his desk and began rummaging through his bag. "The thing about Void Stalkers is that they are used to being the apex predators. They have never encountered a species that fights back effectively. Makes them overconfident." He pulled something from his bag that looked like a small metallic cube. "Dean Krugvorth, I need you to evacuate all non-essential personnel from the Academy immediately." "Non-essential?" "This is an evacuation scenario. Everyone is non-essential." Collins looked up with that same mild expression he had worn while facing down Zephyr. "Not everyone. I am going to need volunteers." "Volunteers for what?" Dean Krugvorth's voice was getting higher with each word. "To help me convince the Void Stalkers that coming here was a mistake." The cube in his hand began to glow with a soft blue light, and suddenly the air in the room felt different. Charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. Zephyr-Nine-Claws was the first to speak. "I volunteer." "Absolutely not," Professor Vex-Narath and Dean Krugvorth said simultaneously. "Actually," the human said thoughtfully, "that might not be a bad idea. Void Stalkers respect predatory capability. Having the heir to the apex predator dynasty standing beside me might make them think twice about their approach." "Think twice?" Dean Krugvorth's exoskeleton was rattling with stress. "Ranger Collins, these beings destroy star systems for entertainment. They do not negotiate." "No," Collins agreed. "They do not. But they do understand strength. And they definitely understand consequences." The cube was glowing brighter now, and I could hear a low humming sound coming from it. "The question is, are they ready to face a species that has spent the last 50,000 years perfecting the art of warfare?" 50,000 years? Piptol squeaked from behind his pile of data pads. Collins smiled, and this time there was nothing friendly about it. "Humans have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We have been killing each other with increasingly creative methods for our entire evolutionary history. We turned war into an art form, then into a science, then into something approaching poetry." He pressed something on the side of the cube, and the humming intensified. "The Void Stalkers think they are apex predators, because they can destroy civilizations. But humans? We do not just destroy civilizations. We study them first. We learn their weaknesses, their fears, their breaking points. We plan for every contingency, prepare for every possibility, and then we execute our strategy with the kind of methodical precision that only comes from millennia of practice. The emergency alert system activated again. Update. Hostile fleet has increased to 47 vessels. They are demanding immediate compliance and have begun charging weapon systems. Collins checked something on his wrist device. Right on schedule. They always do that. It is supposed to be intimidating. Supposed to be? Professor Vex-Narath managed. Psychological warfare. Very effective against species that have not spent generations studying the same techniques. The human looked around the room. Anyone else want to volunteer for what might be the most educational experience of their lives? To my utter amazement, students began raising their claws, tentacles, and appendages. Not all of them, mind you. Some were still pressed against the walls looking like they wanted to burrow through the titanium plating. But enough. Enough to make Dean Krugvorth's compound eyes nearly pop out of his skull. This is madness, he clicked frantically. I cannot allow students to participate in what amounts to a suicide mission. Dean, Collins said gently. With respect, this stopped being your decision the moment those ships entered our system. The cube was now glowing so brightly that it was difficult to look at directly. But if it makes you feel better, I can promise you that none of your students will be in any real danger. How can you possibly promise that? Collins grinned, and the expression was absolutely terrifying in its confidence. Because in about 30 minutes, there are not going to be any Void Stalkers left to pose a threat. The final emergency alert echoed through the academy. All personnel, hostile fleet has moved into attack position. Impact estimated in 28 minutes. Ranger Collins stood up, the glowing cube floating above his palm like a miniature star. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted predators, class is now in session. Today's lesson: why humans are called the Death World species. And as the Academy's defensive systems came online, and the first wave of Void Stalker fighters began their attack run, I realized that everything we thought we knew about the food chain was about to be rewritten. The cube in Collins's hand suddenly projected a three-dimensional holographic display that filled half the classroom. It showed the entire Centauri system in real time, with red dots representing the Void Stalker fleet, and blue indicators marking what I assumed were defensive positions. Now then, Collins said, his voice taking on the tone of a professor addressing particularly slow students, let us discuss the fundamental tactical errors our uninvited guests have already made. He gestured to the hologram, and the display zoomed in on the approaching fleet. First mistake. They announced their presence. Void Stalkers are used to intimidating their prey into surrender through overwhelming displays of force. But humans learned a long time ago that the element of surprise is worth more than a dozen battleships. As if summoned by his words, new contacts began appearing on the display. Dozens of them, moving with impossible speed and precision through the asteroid field surrounding the Academy. What are those? Zephyr asked, his predatory instincts clearly tracking the new arrivals. Human reinforcements, Collins replied casually. You did not think I came here alone, did you? My species has a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Dean Krugvorth was frantically trying to contact the Academy's command center, but his communications seemed to be experiencing some kind of interference. How is this possible? Our sensors detected nothing. Second mistake, Collins continued, highlighting several Void Stalker vessels on the display. They assumed this was a rescue mission. They think they are here to collect one wayward human and punish those who harbored him. But this? He gestured to the hologram. This is a trap. The human ships were now moving into position around the Void Stalker fleet, and I noticed something that made my maintenance circuits freeze in terror. The human vessels were smaller than the Void Stalker ships. Much smaller. But there were far more of them, and they were moving in patterns that suggested a level of coordination that should have been impossible for individual vessels. You see, Collins explained, his voice now carrying that same patient tone he had used when teaching Zephyr about manners. Void Stalkers hunt like ancient predators. They rely on size, intimidation, and overwhelming firepower. Very effective against prey that panics and runs. But humans? We evolved as pack hunters. The display showed the human ships beginning to form complex geometric patterns around their targets. It looked almost like a dance, if dances could be performed by instruments of war, moving at significant fractions of light speed. "Third mistake," Collins said, his smile growing wider. "They brought exactly the number of ships they thought they needed to destroy this academy and capture one human. But they failed to account for the fact that humans do not think in terms of minimum necessary force. We think in terms of absolute certainty." Professor Vex Narath was staring at the display with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. "How many ships do you have out there?" "Enough," Collins replied simply. "My species has another saying. If you find yourself in a fair fight, someone made a serious planning error." The first exchange of weapons fire lit up the holographic display like a festival of death. The Void Stalker vessels opened up with the kind of devastating energy weapons that could crack planets, their attacks coordinated and brutal. For a moment, it looked like the human ships might be overwhelmed by sheer firepower. Then the human fleet responded, and I understood why Collins had been so confident. The human vessels did not simply return fire. They moved like a single organism, each ship covering another, creating overlapping fields of protection and attack that turned individual vessels into components of a larger, impossibly deadly machine. Their weapons were different too, more precise, more targeted. Instead of trying to overpower the Void Stalker defenses, they found the weak points, the gaps, the vulnerable systems that other species never even noticed. "You see," Collins said conversationally, watching as 3 Void Stalker ships erupted into brilliant fireballs. "Most species develop weapons to kill their prey more efficiently. Humans developed weapons to kill other humans more efficiently. There is a significant difference in approach." Within minutes, the tide of battle had shifted completely. The Void Stalker fleet, which had seemed so overwhelmingly powerful just moments before, was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought like nothing they had ever encountered. "This is impossible," Dean Krugvorth whispered. "The Void Stalkers have terrorized the galaxy for millennia. They are unstoppable." "They were unstoppable," Collins corrected gently. "But that was before they encountered a species that has been perfecting the art of making the unstoppable very, very stopped." The remaining Void Stalker ships were now trying to retreat, but the human vessels had anticipated this as well. Escape routes were blocked, retreat vectors covered, and what had begun as a coordinated assault had become a carefully orchestrated annihilation. "Fourth and final mistake," Collins said, as the last Void Stalker vessel disappeared in a flash of superheated plasma. "They assume that because humans look soft and weak and harmless, we actually are soft and weak and harmless. But evolution does not work that way. When a species looks vulnerable but survives anyway, it usually means they have developed other advantages to compensate." The holographic display now showed only blue contacts, the human fleet maintaining perfect formation as they began cleanup operations. Collins deactivated the cube, and the display faded away, leaving us all sitting in a classroom that suddenly felt very small and very quiet. "So," he said, turning back to the class with that same mild expression he had worn at the beginning. "Any questions?" Because when the human said his species never gave up, he had not been boasting. He had been warning us.